Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about knowledge gaps. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, what can you touch on what the most common knowledge gaps are for junior developers or self-taught developers at least? I'm assuming just junior self-taught developers here. Or maybe just self-taught developers in general. But let's get into it. So this is a good question. I can of course only tell you what I've seen myself from the people, like some of the self-taught developers I've worked with in the past and some of them that I work with today. So the first thing I want to say though is that when it comes to being self-taught, usually it's not always true, but the line blurs a little bit the more experience you have. There are things that sometimes are outstanding with even a more experienced self-taught developer, but I just want you to know that the most profound differences are found in the beginning of things, and later on it matters a little bit less. But that's not an exception as to this rule necessarily, because I do know of a few cases where a very experienced developer with like 10, 15 years plus of developer work experience still have had issues getting a job due to code interview or things of this nature, just because of knowledge gap, basically, where they lack an understanding of certain things, right? But let's actually talk about the most common thing. Now, the most common thing is that a self-taught developer lacks what I call the theory. And the theory is basically simple things, such in at least for most developers would consider this to be simple things, such as just a profound and like deep and good understanding of, say, object-oriented programming, the different paradigms, what is inheritance, like interfaces, like all of this sort of stuff. Now, the reason why they usually lack a understanding of these basic concepts and algorithmic thinking and things of this nature is because when you are self-taught, you will tend to favor learning through doing. And it's not just because you do it by yourself. It is because most of the tutorials and the learning materials on the web are project focused. They're focused on building something, and that's great. But the thing about this is that focuses primarily on the actual building of a specific project of some sort. And that's great if you want to learn how to build a specific project, or if you want to learn how to use a specific tool or a specific framework or something like that, right? But it's not so great for when it comes to learning the theory about software development. And that's something that, although it may not feel as important to you right away, is something that becomes increasingly important the more complicated the problems that you work on. Especially when you get to a point where you're going to have to do a lot of your own thinking. There's no like off-the-shelf solution, or there's no library for it or something like that. You really need to think about it yourself. That's when these things starts to matter. And this is something that is deeply embarrassing for everybody involved. Like it's something that I don't think should be underestimated. It's something that it's almost the reverse. If you have that's what I see at least. It's quite common to see that a self-taught developer has a deeper understanding of tooling, a wider range of tools that they feel comfortable with when they first start working. And someone who's fresh out of college they don't know all that many tools in comparison. This is not always true, of course, but they do have an understanding of the fundamentals, the core skills, the theory, if you will. And that's because official education usually focuses on the academics of programming or computer science and so forth. While, as I said, self-taught developers are usually more project-oriented. So I have worked with junior developers where it was, deeply embarrassing for everybody, to where it was hard for us to have a normal conversation about, I couldn't give them a task where I said, all right, I need you to do this work here. And because they've never worked with a type system, they've never worked with inheritance or anything like that, they had problems just understanding what was going on in the code base. And I'm not going to say too much about it, but that's something that is such a profound hole in their knowledge that they could have lost the job if over that. Most likely they have. I would be surprised if nobody has noticed it before, because it's such a, for a professional programmer, it's like one of the most embarrassing things that you can imagine. It's up there with not knowing how to ride a bicycle, because it's a social embarrassment to not know how to ride a bicycle, or not know how to swim, or, well, an extreme case I would say kind of maybe a little bit too far is to not know how to read. It is something that is just expected of you. You are expected to know this sort of thing for most things that you do, just in general. And I would say that's the biggest thing by far, that the theory behind programming is something that is lacking. Other things that are a little bit more subtle and not as important is an understanding of testing practices, like how to do proper testing and so forth. Some of them, like some self-taught developers, actually know this, of course, because they realize that this is an important factor. I mean, the college kids sometimes, depending on education, they don't really know so much about it either. It kind of depends on what their path through the education system has been. If they're more theoretical, it might be less practical, it might be less important. But I would say that is the most important, like the two main things, where, yeah, like just a general understanding of a lack of understanding when it comes to the theory behind programming. And I think that that's something that it's not that difficult to grasp, or rather to learn by yourself either. So it's not, as I said, it's not about someone being necessarily dumber or like less educated than somebody else. It's more about the path through the education system, like have you picked up all the pieces that you're going to need. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually the thing that differentiates a self-taught developer from a educated, like an official education type of developer, is like the knowledge gap, if you will, is usually the theory. That's usually what you see. You will see self-taught developers be fairly proficient with their own tooling and the things. I mean, they can produce code as anybody else, right? But they lack a deeper understanding of the core skills, the theory. And if you are self-taught, I highly recommend that you make sure that you have these things with you, because they do actually matter. If nothing else, it's important that you understand these basic concepts, because if you don't, it will be a social embarrassment for you, unless you are working in some very prejudiced environment and you're a front-end developer and nobody expects you to know anything but CSS. I don't know. But it's important for you to, it's part of learning how to speak the lingo, if you will. You should understand these things, and if you don't, it's kind of weird to most people, because most people within software development who works at a professional level expects every programmer to know the fundamentals of programming. It's not just about the tooling, it's also about the theory. Have a great day.